Oh, I all look good. Something else, decide to do it now. Decide whatever you want to do, that you are now going to become actively involved right now, exploring the possibilities for you, that you're going to look at it and do just a little bit of it right now. When I decided to become a speaker, I didn't just quit my job and run out saying, I'm a motivational speaker. No, what I did was, I decided to start looking at other people that were involved in the speaking profession. I volunteered to work with some speakers so that I could learn. Whatever you want to do, get your feet wet. Gain some experience doing some volunteer work in that area and find out whether or not this thing you want to do will fit for you. A friend of mine told me he wanted to have a restaurant. I said, have you ever operated a restaurant before? He said, no. I said, well, really, you don't even know if you want one. I said, what's your expertise? What do you bring to the table? He said, I can cook real good. I said, well, what about the management side? What about the business part of the restaurant? You're not going to be cooking all the time. Somebody's got to receive the money. Who's going to manage the personnel? He said, you got a point there. So this guy got a job in a restaurant in the evening time on a part-time basis. After doing that for a while, he said, you know what? I think I just want to be a chef. He said after working there, people didn't show up to work. He said it was hard to find help. People were irresponsible. The headaches, the guests were just giving him problems day in and day out. They were never satisfied. He said, no, I just think I'll stick to cooking. See, you got to find out what fits for you, because you might decide after you go up in there and examine it, experience it, and get some hands-on exposure that this is really not what you want. This does not fit for me. So decide that you're going to do that now. John H. Johnson said something that's very important. He said, there's no defense against an excellence that meets a pressing public need. See, whatever you decide to do, look at it and find out, what is it that I have that I could bring to the table that will enable me to ensure my success? Where is the opening for you? There's room for you out here in our arena called life. There's room for you to come out and live your dream. Don't allow but to keep you in the corner or keep you up in the bleachers looking at life, being a spectator instead of a participant, making a difference in life. I believe that all of us came here with something. All of us showed up to give something, and nobody is going to give that service that you have to give. No one's going to produce your product. No one's going to write your book. No one's going to open your academy. No one's going to create your daycare with a special curriculum to help cultivate high self-esteem in our children. That's your idea. And if you don't bring your idea out here, when you die, all of us will suffer because we've been deprived of your genius. Because you allowed but to keep you in the bleachers instead of pursuing your greatness, you take it to your grave with you. And that's what most people do. I think that's why the guy said that many people die at age 21 and don't get buried until they're 65. They're walking dead. You can tell by the way they walk, how they look in the face when they speak to you. I was giving a speech at this high school, and a lady came after school. She said, Mr. Brown, I want to talk to you about my son. I said, what is it? She said, he's not motivated. I said, I wonder why. You got to have energy, ladies and gentlemen. You got to have life. If you're excited about what you're doing, even in the area of selling, you know, people don't buy because of logical reasoning. People buy because of how you make them feel. People don't like to be around dead people. No. Let the dead bury the dead. No, keep them away before they grab you, hold on to you, and pull you down. Whatever you do, you want to be excited about it. You want to have the kind of excitement that is so contagious that people want to be around you. Because whenever you talk to people about this particular idea that you have, they're looking at you. They want to know, do you believe it? Are you the kind of person they want to be in business with? And if you're not positive, if you're not energetic, if you're not fired up about it, how can you expect anybody else to be fired up about your idea? Am I right? All right, repeat after me, please. I'm going to be fired up about my dream. I'm going to go at it with everything I got. Shake somebody's hand on your right and left and say you got what it takes. There are a lot of people who say, but I tried once or twice and it didn't work out. And so they use that as an excuse to never come out again. A guy said, if at first you don't succeed, you're running about average. So if you have come out here with an idea and it didn't work out 2 or 3 times, well, that's all right, you're running about average. You know, I heard something, a jarring question. It said, why is it that people prefer known hells to unknown heavens? You know why? Because it's comfortable, ladies and gentlemen. I remember I was in a service once and I heard Dr. Johnny Coleman give this example. She talked about a man who had been captured behind enemy lines in a war and was sentenced to be killed or another option. The captain said to the guy, "Listen, tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, you can face the firing squad or you can go out this door over here." The guy said, "What's out that door?" The captain said, "No one knows. All we can tell you just unknown horrors," he thought. And the next morning he selected the firing squad. After the shots rang out, the captain's secretary said, "What was beyond that door?" And he said, "Freedom." But very few people would select it because it's unknown. See, a lot of people never live their dreams. A lot of people never do the things they want to do. A lot of people stay on jobs where they're miserable. I read an article called, "Is Your Job Making You Sick?" A lot of people, some of why all know about that already. Somebody's going to say amen. It's all right. That one lady told me, she said, "Les, when I used to go to work, as soon as I stepped in the door, I felt like a refrigerator dropped on my shoulders." How many of why all understand that kind of feeling? They were miserable, just hated to go. After 60 minutes on Sunday afternoon, come Monday morning, my head used to throb. I just couldn't take it. Didn't want to go. Sometimes just for the heck of it, I'd drive on by. Oh, I used to hate to go to work. Many of us choose an active living death. Many of us are walking dead the walking dead because we're not doing what we want to do. Many of us stay in relationships where we're dying together rather than growing, expanding, and living together. We're miserable. But because we don't have the courage to see ourselves beyond that relationship that has turned toxic, we go through life as the living dead. And you can always tell couples that have been together for a little while. Go into a restaurant. The ones sitting side by side, giggling, talking to each other, feeding each other, they just got together about a week ago. You see them in the car, they're sitting all over each other, hugging. Oh, they've been together about 3 days. All right. But if you see a couple sitting in a restaurant across from each other saying, "This is taking so long. I wonder when they're going to hurry up," those are the married ones. I know people who have been married for years, living in 2 separate rooms, sleeping in 2 separate beds. Well, it's cheaper to keep it. Not necessarily. It depends on the price you want to pay. See, there's the price of peace of mind, the price of living the truth, of being honest with yourself and saying, "Wait a minute. There's got to be more than this." So you've got to decide, even if things don't work out, even if I experience defeat or failure, that does not make me a failure. There's a difference between failing and being a failure. If things don't work out, if you don't produce the results you want, that's all it is. But don't confuse who you are with the results that you produce. I used to be a state legislator in Columbus, Ohio, and I remember once I was going to introduce some legislation on the floor. After getting that legislation passed, the guy came up behind me with a piece of legislation I opposed. I was about to stand up and debate this guy when the man next to me said, "Don't debate him." I said, "Why?" He said, "Do you know who that is?" I said, "No." He said, "That's Wilkowski from Toledo. That man can debate." So I raised my hand, "Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from the 29th House District." "Yes, sir. Tell the gentleman I'd like to challenge him on this legislation." Wilkowski said, "I would more than like to, Mr. Speaker." Everybody said, "Hooah." I asked him some questions. He responded. And I thought to myself, why did I ask that man that question? Wilkowski wore me out. I was so embarrassed. I just slinked back to my room. But here's what I learned. When you win because of what you know. When you lose because of what you don't know. So I had to check myself. What is it that I did not know? I wasn't prepared. I did not do enough research. I did not do my homework. So he handled me like he wanted to. But I came back again. I waited on some other legislation, did my homework. But still, he was more than able to take me out again. But pretty soon, each time it became a little bit more difficult for him. A little bit more difficult. And then the older guy started saying, "Would you argue on behalf of this legislation for me?" I said, "Sure." I started volunteering to do work in the legislative committees for the older legislators. The more I did it, the better I became. And then people began to respect me. When I would stand up and say, "Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak on that bill," guys would start trembling. Wait a minute, do we have a problem here? If I hadn't been willing to be humiliated, if I hadn't been willing to allow myself to be embarrassed, if I hadn't been willing to be debated and defeated, if I hadn't been willing to look at myself and say, "Well, I'm just not as good as I'm going to be," I wouldn't have grown. You want that lady to say, "Lord, I ain't what I want to be. I ain't what I'm going to be. But thank God I sure ain't what I was. You can either live your dreams or live your fears. And I think the majority of people actually are not living their dreams, but are living dreams. So I want to ask you a question. What are your fears? What are you afraid of? What are you scared of? Because we all have fears, don't we? We all have something that's blocking us, that's holding us back. And as we begin to look at life, we realize that the reason most people are not living out their true potential, not doing all the things they would really like to do, is because of fear. Some people call fear false evidence appearing real. I'm reminded of a story. There was a guy who had some new neighbors, and these neighbors had a bulldog. Every day when he came home, this bulldog would chase him about half a block from his house. Every day he would have to run, streaking home with this bulldog right on his heels. He got tired of it. So one day when the bulldog was running after him, he stopped. He saw a rock, picked it up, and turned to throw it at the bulldog. And when the bulldog got up on him barking, he realized something. The bulldog didn't have any teeth. That bulldog wasn't chasing him, he was running from it. Because the most the bulldog could do was gum him. And that's what most people go through life doing, running scared. Running scared from things that have no teeth in them, because they are false expectations appearing real. We are brilliant enough to scare ourselves to death. Do you realize that? Some people actually get a kick out of scaring themselves to death. I remember the last frightening movie I saw. It was The Exorcist. I will never forget it. I was so frightened when I came home. I drove into the driveway and had already called my former wife. I said, listen, turn the lights on. I pulled into the driveway, but when I went to get out of the car, I couldn't move. I started blowing the horn. Madeline, they got me. She came to the kitchen door and said, take your seatbelt loose, fool. I said, oh, okay. I was frightened out of my wits, but some people love that. I don't. My brother is a paratrooper, my twin brother. He's in the military, a career man. I would love to jump out of an airplane to parachute, but I'm scared though. I really admire my brother for that. I would love to be macho like that. What are the things you fear? What's been keeping you from living your dream, from doing some things you would like to do? Think about those things. How do we begin to handle fear? Abraham Maslow said life is about growth. He said you can either go back to your comfort zone where you won't find any growth, or you can move forward and face your fears again and again and again, because you're never going to have a fear-free existence. Some fear is acceptable and legitimate. There are some things that you really should be afraid of. Now, you shouldn't allow it to immobilize you. You acknowledge it, you take it into account, and you carry yourself accordingly. There are times when we should proceed with caution, but there's a difference between being stopped by fear and having a fear versus the fear having you. So what do? One, acknowledge it and know that it's okay. Don't condemn yourself for being afraid. It's perfectly fine to have some fears. You acknowledge your fears, you embrace those fears, and then you move on. You act on whatever it is that you fear, because once you embrace it, see, what you resist will persist. What you resist will persist. So one of the most important things is to begin to embrace your fear. Now, the fear of bodily harm, that's legitimate. When I was a disc jockey in Columbus, Ohio, I was young, about 22 or 23, and I thought I was tough. I was on the air, and Al Green, who was a great performer at that time and still is now singing gospel music, had a record. His first hit record was Back Up Train. A guy came into town impersonating Al Green. I happened to know Al Green because I'd already booked him. So when I found out this guy was an imposter, I went on the air and did an editorial about him, exposed him. Now, he was a rather big fellow, and word got around that he was looking for me. He said, let's find that disc jockey. I'm going to knock him in the mouth for having a big mouth. I was driving down Main Street in Columbus, Ohio. I had my son in the car, and I always had this little saying, hey, if anybody puts a threat on me, I'm going to make them honor it. So I saw this guy in the street, pulled around, and said, excuse me, I'll be right back. I got out of the car and said, hey man, I heard you said you were looking for me. I'm Les Brown. He said, you are? I said, yeah, what is it? I'm the one that said you are an imposter. I want to know what you're going to do about it. He opened his coat and he had a gun there. I said, well, whatever I said to hurt your feelings, I want you to also acknowledge your fears, carry yourself accordingly, and do what makes sense for you. Now, one major fear I've always had is a fear of the dentist, and this fear had me. I didn't just have that fear, the fear had me. And what really reinforced it, you have to watch things that can feed your fear. I saw a movie that most people wouldn't remember. It was starring Dustin Hoffman. It's called The Marathon Man with Laurence Olivier. In that movie, Olivier was trying to get a confession out of Hoffman, and he took this drill out. Let me tell you something, he went into Hoffman's mouth with that drill, and I had $1 worth of popcorn that went everywhere. Do you know I could not go to the dentist for 5 years? I had left broadcasting, went to the Ohio legislature, and had an impacted wisdom tooth now that hurts. I would call the dentist's office, and as soon as they answered, I'd hang up. That's how frightened I was. Dr. Hamlet's office, boom. I'd hang up. Then I got to the point where I could just ask for an appointment. Hello? But I wouldn't give my real name because I knew I wasn't going to keep it. I'd give anybody's name, Joe, Jiggly, Jim, it didn't matter. And pretty soon I got to the point where I could give my real name. It was about 4 years after that. I finally said, my name is Les Brown. Then I'd call back and say, look, due to my legislative agenda, I won't be able to make it. The lady on the phone finally said, you're scared, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not. She said, then why don't you come in? I said, that's none of your business. She said, you're not coming in because you're scared. I wish you wouldn't waste our time. And she hung up. I said, you have no right to do that to people like me. Finally, to make a long story short, I was hurting so bad that I said, wait a minute, I've got to do something. And I asked myself, what am I afraid of? Go there and handle it. I said, Dr. Hamlet, I just can't hear this drill. If you can do whatever you need to do, just don't let me hear the drill. That sound gets me. Don't pull that drill out on me. He said, just calm down, come on in. And you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. One of the things you find out when you face your fears is that it's not as bad as you think it is. When people say, I just can't do it, I can't handle it, I mean really, 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 I can't handle it, what they're envisioning is that they're going to clock out, like they're going to die. And guess what? We've all had occasions when we confronted our fears, when we had to do something we felt uncomfortable with, something we didn't want to do, and we did not die. They didn't come take us and put us in a box somewhere. Am I right? So what we've got to begin to do is ask, how do we handle that? What's the process? Because it's all up in here. One, I think, is to imagine the worst case scenario. I imagined that the dentist went in my mouth with that drill and that I just croaked out. That was my worst case scenario. Then I used another technique, visualizing myself being more than able and capable of handling it. I used to have a tremendous inferiority complex about speaking before people that I felt had more going for them than I did because I'm not college trained. I used to believe that college educated people were the most intelligent people on the planet and that I had nothing to say that they would listen to. That's how I felt. So I had to visualize myself speaking before them, speaking before various audiences that had more going for them than I did, and realize and appreciate my own value, that I was a worthwhile person, even though I didn't have all that they had. I didn't have the money, I didn't have the education they had. So part of the process is seeing yourself as worthy, as capable, as having what you need to make you a worthwhile person. That you're more than able, that you deserve to be listened to, that you deserve to have that dream, that passion, whatever it is that you see and envision for yourself. You've got to see it in your mind's eye and know that you've got what it takes. Repeat after me, please. I must see it in my mind's eye. See yourself confronting your fears, handling your fears. I'm more than able. Shake somebody's hand on your right and left and say, you got the right stuff. So as you look at your life, as you look into the future, ask yourself, what fears am I holding on to? What fears am I allowing to imprison me? What fears are keeping me from breaking out, from living up to my true potential? What fears are keeping me from really being happy, from having a sense of adventure and excitement in my life? What fears are keeping me from controlling my destiny? What fears am I giving permission to? What I said is that we must not give our permission to fear to immobilize us. Because whatever discomfort you experience, whatever challenges or difficulties arise, you've got to handle it. You've got to go up in there and wrestle with it. Will it be easy? No. Will it be challenging? Yes. A friend of mine is going into recovery. He's been addicted to crack cocaine and alcohol for years. He was talking about how challenging it was and why he was dreading going cold turkey. I said, what do you want me to tell you? That it's going to be a picnic? No, it's not. Is it going to kick your butt? Yes, it is. Are you going to want to die? Yes, that's a part of it. But that's just what you must go through to get where you want to go. And guess what? You are strong enough to do it. You're strong enough, and your life is worth whatever you have to go through to get past this addiction. Whenever you have to do this dream you've got, whatever you want to do, will it be easy to just run out there and do it? No. Will it happen overnight? No. Will it be a struggle? Yes. Will there be times when you can't make ends meet? Yes, that's a part of it. Will there be times when you don't know what to do? Yes, that's a part of it. Will you have opposition? Will things go wrong? Sometimes you will have many visits from Murphy. Now, if you say, well, who's Murphy? Don't worry, somebody must have told us somewhere along the line. I don't know where, but somebody must have told people that life is going to be real easy. No, if they told you that, I've got a special announcement, they lied. I'll never forget, I had a special piece of legislation I wanted to get passed. I said to a guy, look, can I count on your vote? He said, yes. And I said, look here, if I can't count on it, let me know. There's another guy that owes me a chip, and I can call on that, and I won't need your vote. But I do need it. If you say you're going to do it, do it. He said, you can count on it. Legislation came up. He voted against my bill. My bill passed anyway. I went back to him and said, hey, I told you I needed the vote, but if you couldn't give it up, let me know. I would have gotten somebody else. Why did you tell me that? He said, I lied. I was in shock. How many of you have been worn out by life? You didn't expect it. You thought you'd go to school, get good grades, get a job, and you'd come out here and be able to live happily ever after. And now you say they lied? Yes, they did. They never told me. You know that song that says, Mama told me there'd be days like this. They didn't even tell us that. You know, life is challenging. Some stuff out here you didn't read in a book anywhere. Nobody warned you that it was going to come down on you like this. That's called life. There are challenges like that. So what's the next piece? You accept yourself. Then you accept fear as a fact, not a force. See, when you accept yourself and you accept fear as a fact, that means it's something that happens. It's something that you're going to experience, but it is not a force to hold you back. It doesn't have any special power other than the power you give it. So you accept the fact that you are afraid, and then you move on anyhow. You move past it. And you do whatever you've got to do. I was at a big motivational rally for a gentleman by the name of Dexter Yeager down in the Carolinas. I was standing backstage and I had to go out. I was the last speaker on the program. It was the first time I'd been in a stadium of this size, over 10,000 people. You couldn't even see the people because the lights were just blaring in your eyes. It was called Free Enterprise Day. I was afraid. My heart was beating fast. I was just pacing back and forth. Dexter said, are you all right? I said, yeah, I'm all right. So I said, wait a minute, just calm down. Calm yourself. Hold me. It's all right, Les. It's all right. All right. Just be as scared as you can be. See, that's why I say embrace that fear. Just try and see how scared you can really get. And stop. Breathe deep. So the guy came back and said, are you about to die? I said, no, I'm fine. But after I started embracing it, after I started trying to make myself as afraid as I could get, imagining the worst thing that could happen, like I could go out there and faint on stage, the more I laughed at myself. I started talking to myself. I said, you know, you scared today? And I just calmed myself down. I went out there and I cooked. And that's what you've got to do. I had another experience where I was at a major corporation. It was one of my first major presentations, and I had 4 other presenters that had large firms. One of the things you've got to do is watch your inner conversation. Discipline your thinking and your imagination, because if you don't, your mind will take you on a wild trip. So my mind said, hey, Les, Les. I said, what? These guys are going to wipe you out. You can't compete with them. Because I heard these guys sitting across from me, and they were talking about all that they had going for them. And I started doubting myself. I became afraid. I started thinking maybe I shouldn't go in there. And I knew then, this is what I suggest to you sometimes, you've got to talk to yourself. Talking to yourself can be a good exercise, might be the only intelligent conversation you ever get. So I got up, went in the bathroom, and started talking to myself. I said, Les Brown, let me tell you something. What do you care about these guys and their firms and all their money? You've got 6 children you've got to feed. You've got a mama you've got to take care of. You ain't got nothing to lose. I went in that room, looked at those people and said, don't you do nothing till you hear from me. And I got that contract too. So when your lower self is talking to you, telling you what you can't do, part of what you've got to do is be your own motivator. You can, and you can't talk casually to yourself. You can't say, now you must calm down. No, that subconscious mind won't hear that. You've got to have a real conversation with yourself. Hey, and answer yourself too. Don't pay people any attention. You ask yourself, hey, what you going to do? I'm going in there to get off. All right, very good. Go in there and take care of business. You've got to talk to yourself. You build yourself up, and you'll feel your energy level rising. People will feel that energy around you. Because if you go through life being afraid, people can sense that. They can pick up that fear. That's why you've got to stand up inside yourself. I'm reminded of the little boy who was on a bus, and some bigger fellows were picking on him. They were thumping him on the head, and he wanted to move away from them. But every time he stood up, they would push him back down. He stood up again, and they pushed him down once more. He kept standing up, and they kept pushing him down, holding him there. Finally, he said, you might hold me down, but I'm standing up inside myself. And that's what you've got to do in life. See, when you're not filling your life with the things you're capable of doing, we all have something we've been given, and I don't think it's optional for us to sit on what we have. If you're sitting on your gifts, if you're not using what you've been given, I believe everybody has something to bring to this planet that only they can do, that only they can perform, that only they can initiate. And if you don't do that, if you're not filling your life with your life's work or your mission, then there are gaps in your life. And what happens when we're not living out our true identity? We begin to fill those gaps. We fill those holes with garbage, alcohol, drugs, worry, self-destructive behavior. So when you begin to look at your life and you know you're not doing what you can do because you've allowed yourself to be held captive by your fears, when you don't have a true appreciation and acceptance for who you are, and you allow yourself to be immobilized by fear, what happens? You begin to abuse yourself. You begin to sabotage your life. You begin to sabotage your dreams. You begin to unconsciously work against yourself. You become your own worst enemy. So what do you do about that? Well, you begin to realize that your dream and your gifts have so much meaning and so much value that your hunger for them will begin to push you past the fear. Your hunger to achieve them will give you a special drive. As you work on yourself, as you begin to acknowledge your true identity, the true power that you have, the true capacity you have to bring about change, the miracle working power that you have within yourself to do the things you want to do, when you take that on, something shifts. I'm reminded of a gentleman who was studying a special tribe in Africa, headhunters, and he had difficulty developing a relationship with these tribesmen because he was afraid they would take his head. Now, I'll tell you, all fears aren't bad. That was a legitimate fear. That's a good fear that'll give you a headache. So he worked there for a long time with no effort, no progress in developing relationships, no rapport, no level of trust. Finally, one night while lying in bed, he thought to himself, what is it that you came here to do? What is your life's work as a missionary? He said, I came to study these tribesmen. Then he asked himself, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? They could kill me. And at that moment, he made a decision. He said, hey, this is what I came here to do. I know there's risk involved, and I'm going to do it, come what may. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. The next day, he went back to work, trying to talk to and interview the members of the tribe. And something changed. They began to respond to him. They threw out the welcome mat for him. And years later, when people came to see what progress he had made, they asked him, how were you able to do this? How did you convert the relationship from being hostile to one that was positive? And he said something that I think has value for all of us. He said, when life can no longer threaten you with death, what else is there? And the majority of the fears we have are not life or death fears. They're not those kinds of fears. But through our imagination, we blow them out of proportion. We give them more power than they actually have or deserve. And we permit them to govern our lives. We permit them to determine how far we can stretch out on our dreams, how far we can go in discovering our true potential. And as we begin to look at ourselves, we have to stop and say, wait a minute, just take a moment and assess yourself. Evaluate what's really happening. Say, hold on, I've been sweating this out, but what's the worst thing that can happen to me in this situation? Will it kill me? Will I die? Why am I going through all of these changes over this? How much power does this really have over me? And am I the one feeding power into it? See, a lot of times we allow ourselves to be programmed into fear. You watch the news, read the newspaper, and you'd be scared to come out of the house. Am I right? You'd be afraid. So ask yourself, what kinds of things are you feeding your consciousness? What kinds of thoughts are you putting into your mind that will either enable you to move forward or justify staying stuck where you are? Why are you staying where you are? Another piece that I look at, when I finally decided that I was going to go to the dentist, the pain was so great I couldn't hold out any longer. All of a sudden, the fear didn't matter. I said, take me now. Some people need fear. You know, I have a friend, we told him, hey man, you need to lose some weight. You're getting overweight and out of shape. And at our age, we need to have a regular program. But Bud said, man, I've been fat since I was a little boy. I'm big boned. I've never seen a fat skeleton though. Well, Bud became ill. How many of you have ever seen a fat skeleton, right? I know. Bud became ill, passed out, and I was there. The doctor was talking to him. And Bud, I think, was going to go right back to the same old eating habits and doing everything as before. I said, look here, you are a diabetic. The doctor said, now here are some of the side effects. You could go blind. You could become an amputee. None of that touched him. Then the doctor said, you could become impotent. Bud sat up and said, what did you say? Bud has lost weight. He exercises every day. He's into body sculpting. At 48 years young, he looks great. I can't believe it. Just that one statement made all the difference in the world. Bud is a new man today. So, what is it that has to happen to you? Some people don't take corrective measures to improve their health until they get a pronouncement that they're about to die. Then they start, okay, all right, I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do. But before that, they won't. They can see people dropping off like flies around them, and they'll say, well, that's them. You got to go from something. We go through life really blocking ourselves constantly, and fear is one of the greatest instruments that we use to stifle our true potential. But when you begin to look at your life, you can decide to use fear as a blocker, or you can decide to use it as a building block. You can decide, hey, look here, I'm going to move in this direction. I'm not going to allow anything to stop me from doing what I want to do. Shake somebody's hand on your right and left and say, I'm unstoppable. See, when you begin to understand and acknowledge your fear, and you go forth anyhow you go forth in a spirit, and a knowing that there's a way for you to handle this. There's a way out here somewhere. There's a solution to whatever it is you're seeking, and you have the capacity to handle whatever comes up, to face it. And rather than feeling powerless, you begin to feel powerful. With all of the major downsizings happening across this country, there are a lot of people biting their fingers in fear that they might lose their jobs. But there are a few people who have decided within themselves, I'm going to make it. Some people are waiting to be cut. Some people are moving on their own because they feel within themselves, I've got what it takes to make it. They're not afraid of tomorrow because of how they see themselves, because of what they feel they deserve, because of what they feel they can create for themselves. These people have decided as they look at the future, and as they look at themselves, there's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way for me to begin to create a way out of no way. And when you have that kind of consciousness, when you have that kind of spirit, nothing can stop you. Nothing.